Welcome back to Second Helping, the show of choice for fans and followers of the number one league in all of collegiate athletics, the Southeastern Conference. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BamaOnline.com, part of the On3 network, alongside my great friend and co-host, Mr. Brent Beaird, longtime college football analyst for First Coast News down in Jacksonville, Florida. Brent, of course, also a voter for the number one individual honor in collegiate athletics, the Heisman Trophy. Brent, I'm going to guess on this Friday morning as we record this, you're doing a little bit better than Scotty Scheffler
Yeah.
up there in Louisville, trying to make his second round tee time for the PGA Championship. And in all seriousness, just a tragic morning.
Really?
You've got a pedestrian killed apparently in a situation involving one of the shuttle buses, and now Scotty rolls up trying to get in and get ready for his early-ish tee time. Got some rain up there too, kind of pushing some things back. He's detained. He is taken downtown. Mugshot of Scotty Scheffler. He's booked on multiple charges. He's released on his own recognizance. So as we sit here right now recording this, Scotty Scheffler trying to make that 10:08 tee time. And again, perspective needed though, because some very, very unfortunate situations involved in this that a lot bigger than golf or situation.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Great to be with you as always. First of all, but yeah, certainly prayers and thoughts go out to all these people who are involved. And look, as far as what you and I do on a daily basis, if he is able to rebound from this, from the mental aspect of it, Travis, and either win this thing or at least get in the top five, that will really show you not only his physical talent but his mental toughness too.
Yeah, and just a whirlwind of life-changing events in the last couple of 3 months for Scotty Scheffler, both
Really?
professionally on the golf course. He has been on an incredible heater. His wife gave birth to their first child, a little boy, here in the last couple of weeks. Back on the golf course, trying to win another major championship, Scotty Scheffler, and just craziness on a Friday morning. But we're going to bring it back. We're going to return the
Yes.
earth to its sports axis as we talk
Yes.
Southeastern Conference college football with you. And I know on a much more positive note, Brent, the countdown officially inside 100 days, I see here, until the start of another season.
Yeah, 99 days until kickoff in week 0, which, look, once we get to this point, it really seems like it happens almost overnight. But that certainly, a lot of those that are going on. And the other kickoff will be for preseason magazines, which, Travis, believe it or not, may be here next week.
Wow.
Last year, the previous date was, and I'm crazy enough to write this down, was May 23rd. So it doesn't take long to do the math. Lindy's and Athlon, or one of them at least, on the bookshelves by then. And Phil Steele has said his will be out by July the 4th. I still give Steele a lot of credit. You saw this like I did, on Twitter. Thank you to Coach so-and-so for giving me an hour of his time.
Yeah.
I mean, Trav, who does that besides Phil Steele?
Yeah, I don't think Nick Saban gave Phil an hour, but Kalen DeBoer apparently did.
Yeah.
For Alabama, and Timmy Chang of Hawaii. And it speaks to the thoroughness that Phil goes to the extent he goes to with that publication. I guess if you're in that business at this point with the transfer portal, it's like there's not a good time to really drop a publication because things are still going to be changing, happening right through the summer, it appears. You get into fall camp, things can certainly change as well heading into the season. So pick a date, circle it, and go ahead and drop that baby. I know Brent Beaird is extremely excited about about those.
Hey, listen, from your magazine from a lifetime ago, Southeastern Prep Illustrated, I mean, you've got to travel with your publisher. You've got to kind of a drop dead date, right? And you got to have that thing in. You can't get it all. So I feel for these guys. Probably going to press before they want to.
Yeah, I think the logistics, the dynamics involved for these type of publications in comparison to SPI back in the day. Probably a little bit different. Technology has
Yeah,
certainly come a
yeah,
long ways, but yeah, back in the early to mid 90s, there were run dates that you had to have reserved and
yes,
booked, and you had to have it in,
yeah,
or you were just going to kind of miss your spot. Speaking of spots, we've got some more early kickoff
yes.
times, Brent, for the 2024 season. What are one or two, maybe more, that have caught your eye here in the last couple of days?
Yeah, that Florida State Georgia Tech kickoff time in Ireland now. By the way, LSU trying to get a game in Ireland too. We just wanted to throw that in there. Mike Norvell was in town this week, had a chance to be among the media who interviewed him. He said, we're going to keep the guys there an extra day just to be able to see the sights. I mean, they'll win the game. But Trev, here's the thing about FSU that is really unique. I'm curious if you've ever heard of this. I'm not sure I have. They've got not one, not two, but 3 bye weeks this year because of the
Yeah,
week.
they're playing like Sub-Zero week. There's
Yeah,
0 week,
yeah,
and now there's going to be Sub-Zero week. It appears, Brent.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So 3 bye weeks, frankly, could even be a little bit of a challenge. But boy, oh boy, on August 31st on that Saturday, Georgia and Clemson and Atlanta in that nooner, and then you've got Miami and Florida State on ABC, and then ABC at later on in what you would call a triple header, Notre Dame and A&M. So, Trev, ABC now with the SEC kind of coming out strong on that weekend of Labor Day.
Wrote that big check, man. Going to reap the benefit of it
Right.
right out of the gates. And also on ESPN that evening, you're going to have Kalen DeBoer in his
Yep.
debut as the
Yep.
Alabama head
Absolutely.
coach. That's a 7 Eastern kickoff from Bryant-Denny Stadium on the Worldwide Leader. You get into week 2, certainly some interesting kick times there. You're going to have some of these SEC teams too playing against maybe some Big Ten competition,
Yeah.
maybe some Pac-12 or well, I guess it's Big 12 or Big 10 these days as we move into 2024. But Alabama, Wisconsin, I know is going to be a big noon kickoff on Fox from Madison, Wisconsin. So interesting one there as well.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And then you've got that big one, Texas at Michigan, which is your classic helmet game. Michigan's got more players than people realize, but that's a big game for the Longhorns, who will then be in the SEC, amazingly so. So we'll get more kickoff dates as it draws a little closer to June, in the middle of June. But boy, oh boy, Trav, I know folks can't wait for that LSU Southern Cal Las Vegas game on Sunday night. Basically got the eyes on the nation on them. And Trav, LSU, I need to add this up, but LSU, they've lost these 2 in a row to Florida State to open the season. They've lost like 4 games in a row for openers. Tiger fans want to get that change this year.
Yeah, and it's not like Lincoln Riley couldn't use a little
Yeah,
boost of momentum post
right.
Caleb Williams. That's going to be fascinating to see if Miller Moss is really ready to take over that Lincoln Riley offense, and could be some points, I think, out in Vegas.
Yes.
Could be rolling up some big numbers in Vegas on that true opening weekend anyway. Hey, you know what we did last week? We got our defining back-to-backs series going here on Second Helping. We gave you 6 teams to start things last week: Alabama, Arkansas, Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky. This week we're going to move through another 5 because we're going to have 16 teams in
Yeah,
this league coming
that's
up this
right.
football season. So we'll go 5 and 5 the next 2 weeks. And Brent, where we're at on that countdown is those aforementioned LSU Tigers. And looking at the schedule for Brian Kelly coming up, I think it's pretty evident for me anyway. There's that stretch from late October with the road trip at A&M,
Oh, yeah.
but then the Tigers get a bye week before hosting Alabama. It's a back-to-back with a bye. And then after Alabama, though, could be a sneaky post-Alabama trip to Gainesville there as you get into the month of November. That's the stretch I'm looking at for the LSU Tigers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And we mentioned Southern Cal. They also play UCLA.
Battle for LA. Yeah.
That's right. Which is going to be this is a very, very interesting schedule, to say the least. But look, I would kind of go with where you're going at A&M, Bama, and then at Florida. I'll throw an extra one in there too. And again, paramount for these Tigers, got to get that defense fixed, right, Trav? They've got the coaches in there at this point, including Bo Davis. I don't think they're ready for that defensive line the way they want it. And basically, Brian Kelly has said so much. But yes, if you can survive Southern Cal, the middle of that schedule is pretty rough.
It is. And I see where the Tigers actually picked up some transfer portal help, albeit from a Division II defensive tackle. But hey, anything will work right now. As we talked about last week, it's really like with this April portal, the last chance for gas for a stretch of about 400 miles. So you kind of got to take what you can get, and it's probably not going to come cheap. No. Prices are going to be high in that transfer portal as you get closer to the summer months. So, yeah, that looks like the stretches that we both have in mind for the LSU Tigers. You think about the Alabama game, obviously, in early November in Baton Rouge. That's a positive. Coming off a bye week, that should be a positive. Again, with a couple of bye weeks this season, though, coming up, maybe not as critical as it would have been in previous years. Alabama, too, will be coming off a bye week after playing Missouri. So a defining stretch for both those teams. No doubt about it. Let's talk about Mississippi State, the Bulldogs. You talk about interesting early season matchups. How about at Arizona State in week 2?
Yeah.
That's a fascinating game to consider. But when you think about 1-2 punches, boy, Jeff Lebby catching no breaks, is he, in year 1 in Starkville? He's got Florida in Starkville on September the 21st, followed by a road trip to Texas on the 28th. And then in October, he goes to Georgia, A&M back in Starkville the next week. And then as you get into November, at Tennessee, a bye week, but then Missouri at home and Ole Miss on the road. Wow. Difficulty is going to be there for Lebby and his team in year 1.
Boy, they need all the depth they can get. And this is something you and I've talked about for years, and it really is a problem here for Mississippi State. Is just this schedule meat grinder that you lose a starter. And let's just pretend, Trav, they lose what? 1 or 2 starters, and that's very possible at the beginning of that stretch. Well, by the time you get to to Georgia and A&M, I mean, they may be like down half a dozen starters against some of the better teams in the league, and that's certainly something Lebby doesn't need at midseason.
No, he doesn't. Absolutely not. And we talk about those other back-to-backs in terms of what seems manageable in year 1 under Jeff Lebby. I'm going to give you perhaps the biggest of these back-to-backs for the Bulldogs in 2024. And I'm going to go with that stretch there in November. A&M and Arkansas back-to-back weeks. It's actually October, mid-October. October 19th, A&M in Starkville. Next week, follow that up with Arkansas in Starkville. To me, that's where you're going to learn a lot about this football team in year 1 under Lebby, especially in the midsection of the schedule. Should have had a chance to figure some things out. A&M, Arkansas, I look at it from right here, Brent, and I think winnable games and probably more defining games in year 1 back-to-back for Jeff Lebby.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Florida, then going to Texas. And the reason I say that is at that point of the season, Florida may really have its legs underneath it and be on a little bit of a run themselves. And if that defense is playing well, and then, boy, to go get the baptism in Austin is going to be tough. But look, whether it's one you mentioned, the one I mentioned, you put all those together, and that's going to be difficult to say the least.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple ways you can look at these in terms of difficulty, but then also in terms of relative to expectations, right?
Yeah.
For these
Oh yeah.
teams, in terms of what's really going to define the season, it kind of changes from team to team as we work through this. Missouri, boy, this is a manageable schedule. And I think this is in large
Yeah.
part why a lot of folks can go ahead and envision
Yes.
Missouri in the college football playoff with 12
Yes.
teams, because really there's two games that stand
Yeah.
out in terms of back to backs, and there's a
Right.
bye week in between those. It's
Yeah.
at Alabama um, on October 26th, and then home against Oklahoma on November the 9th after a bye week.
Wow. Well, Trav, if you ever wanted to get the bugs out, yeah, I would advise Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College, and Vanderbilt to begin. I mean, that's unbelievable when you think about that. Avoiding Texas, Georgia, LSU, and Ole Miss. Now, this will catch up with them at some point, but Trav, could there be maybe a little more pressure on Mizzou with this soft schedule, with folks saying that they would be a great disappointment if they didn't make the playoffs?
Yeah, the only news for Eli Drinkwitz before that trip to Alabama on October the 26th can be bad news,
Yeah, really.
because it should be a taking care of business tour
Yes.
for Missouri in that first half of that schedule, with that, especially that September gauntlet that you laid
Yeah.
out for us there, Brent.
Ooh.
The only reason why we should be surprised by anything involving Missouri before really October the 26th is if Missouri loses a game, and in most
Yeah.
weeks is really even challenged. And that's not to say Missouri doesn't have capable players coming back. Obviously, they do. We've talked about them a lot. The quarterback position with Brady Cook, Luther Burden. Defensively, there are going to be some questions. I think that's
Mhm.
where this helps
Yes.
this team the most, is
Yes.
with the changes on the defensive side of the ball, both in personnel and in terms of coaching staff, sets up really, really nice. Maybe too nice for Missouri. Yeah,
Mhm.
I get some
Yeah.
Ole Miss vibes from Missouri. I've said
Yeah.
that before sometimes.
Really.
Whenever I've thought Ole Miss is going to
Mhm.
be really, really good, it typically hasn't worked out that way. And I
True.
kind of get those feelings potentially about Missouri. Speaking of Ole Miss, Brent, they're up next on our back to backs. And boy, you got a couple of three to choose from for Lane Kiffin's team. Big expectations for Ole Miss, similar to Missouri, again, where the college football playoff is concerned and the viability of the Rebels for the upcoming expanded tournament. Ole Miss at LSU on October the 12th, bye week. Then Oklahoma in Oxford on October the 26th. That's one that caught my eye. And you got Georgia
Yeah.
in Oxford on November the 9th, bye week. Boy, these byes fall at pretty good spots, don't they, for
Really.
the Rebels? Um, and then at UF on November the 23rd. And then you could even tag Mississippi State and Oxford, I guess, on November the 30th if you wanted to Georgia and that trip to Florida. But that's kind of how it sets up for Ole Miss, it looks like.
Yeah, and in terms of physicality, I agree. LSU and then OU is going to be tough. And by the way, Ole Miss rivals Missouri in that first month. Furman, Middle Tennessee, Wake, and Georgia Southern
Yeah,
Trav.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
The trip to Wake is sort of intriguing to
it
me.
is.
I mean, Wake typically is going to be. Is that Dave Clawson?
Yeah,
Do I have that
yeah,
mixed up at Wake Forest? Um, you know, the coaches in the ACC, a lot of them are just NC State, Wake. They're all the same guy to
yeah,
me. It
yeah.
seems like.
Very much.
Um, but no, typically Wake can be problematic, especially in the first month of the season when the roster is still in pretty good shape from a health perspective and hasn't sort of been ground down to a nub at that point. But yeah, I think most folks are going to have an eye on that mid-October stretch of on the road at LSU and then back home against OU to cap the month. Hey, let's talk about OU as we look at these back to backs for SEC teams in the 2024 football season. OU gets Tennessee. I think that's the first ever conference game for OU is going to be Tennessee and Norman on
Yep.
September the 21st, then go to Auburn the next weekend, September the 28th. Then you get to late November, boy, and you get Alabama and Norman on November the 23rd, and then you just cap the regular season with a trip to LSU on November the
Yeah.
30th. Oof.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would agree with you though that those last two are going to be difficult. Now, in the beginning, now people are going to look at this and not think much about it. Temple, Houston, and Tulane. Now, the reality is they'll win all those games probably, but I would throw in there, Travis, that though there's some talent on that trio, and some of those teams could be pretty tough out. So maybe either Houston or Tulane. Somebody could one of these teams could take Oklahoma into the fourth quarter in one of those early September games.
Well, what's interesting is Tulane's coach from last year, Willie Fitz, is now Houston's coach.
That's right. Yes.
College football, right?
Oh, yes. I
2024.
love it.
And some folks would argue that maybe Tulane is even potentially upgraded on Willie Fitz. I'll need to
Yeah.
see that
I will too.
before I'll believe
Agreed.
it. But in going to Troy to make that hire at the
Yeah.
head coaching post for Tulane, perhaps that'll prove to be the case. But I'm with you. I don't think OU has returned to a status as of
No,
yet under Brent Venables
no.
where you can just sleepwalk in
Yeah.
both those games. At least one
Right.
of those games, I won't be surprised if we get deeper into the third quarter and maybe things aren't quite settled for the
Yes.
Sooners, even
Yeah.
on OU's home field. And boy, again, kind of like we talk about with Ole Miss at Wake or Missouri with a game like Boston College, Bill O'Brien bringing
Yeah.
the
That's right.
Eagles
Absolutely.
to Como. The only news really that could be there for Brent Venables, and he doesn't need it, especially going into his first season in the Southeastern Conference, is bad news.
Yeah.
Before you get to that game against Tennessee, should be a lot of fun. How about Nico and Jackson Arnold
Ooh,
shooting it out
really
uh,
nice.
in Norman in late September, and then of course it's all about how you survive the previous 10 games when you start thinking about Alabama, November the 23rd, because it can be brutal at that
Yes.
point of the season in terms of player availability, injuries, and those type of things. I love that November the 23rd weekend now because
Mhm.
traditionally that had been an FCS weekend, right?
Yes,
For
it
the
had.
Southeastern. It's not going to be an FCS
No,
weekend.
no.
It doesn't look like coming up in 2024 around the league. And with that, Brent, let's get into some news and notes. Let's dive into Brent's famed notebook, the encyclopedic one, as he has been referred to in the past, Brent Beaird. Brent, let's get into some of those notes. I see where the college football playoff has made a decision on an upcoming title game venue and some other particular items of interest as well.
I think the thing that amuses me about this to some degree is the announcement was made that a future title game is going to be in Las Vegas. And I remember the day, and you do too, where Las Vegas considered Sin City off limits to the NFL and of college football. And now, Travis, as we know, things have changed considerably, and they're absolutely embracing this game compared to what they would have ever thought of years ago.
Well, it's okay because we're making billions of dollars now,
Absolutely. Yeah.
officially. It's
Yes.
always been $1 billion kind of industry when you talk
Yeah.
about point spreads and gambling on college football. But now college football officially reaping the financial
Yes.
benefit of that. And so all is well. Taboo? No, not at all. Hey, you talk about long timers in the Southeastern Conference. For as long as I can remember, the name Norm Carlson, when you get into the sports information directors around the league, synonymous with Florida football, and especially for me anyway, that Steve Spurrier era. And unfortunately, as you have here in your notebook, Mr. Carlson has passed away.
Yeah, he died at 90 years old. Hootie Ingram, who we talked about last week, also was 90. So both those guys had a great life. He was at Florida 60 years, Trav.
Yeah.
That's amazing to think about that. Really known for helping Steve Spurrier win the Heisman Trophy back in the time in the 60s, to where very few Heisman campaigns were done. He also kind of helped in the nickname of the Swamp. But, and I'll say this quickly, to me, the thing Carlson did was he tried to make a bridge to the media and I've heard this a lot from media friends, to be a kind of a mentor. He knew he was the historian at Florida. And look, you and I, either separately or together, have dealt with enough sports information people in our sports careers to know the difference between really good ones and not so good ones. And Carson was approachable, and he was a guy that would work with the media instead of kind of what we've got today in some schools that do the best to keep a lot of media at arm's length, at least.
Yeah, it never felt confrontational with Norm Carlson in Florida. He seemed to be one of these folks that continued to try to evolve with the changing times as well. Uh, the inception of the internet coverage. You go
Yes.
back to, gosh, 20 plus years ago. My first 3 years or so on the Alabama football beat, I wasn't credentialed for
Yeah.
games
Oh,
at
yeah.
Bryant,
I
BC.
understand that.
I could go to press conferences, I could go
Yeah.
to practices,
Yeah.
but it was still very much a
Mhm.
newspaper dominated beat. Now,
Yes.
within 4 or 5 years, there was a change, and Doug Walker, who is now, I believe, at Florida State. He
He
went
is.
from Alabama to
He
Texas
is.
A&M and now to Florida State. He called me into his office and he said, "Let me get this straight. You've been on this beat for 3 years, but you're not credentialed for games." I said, "No, I'm not." He goes, "Well, that changes today." And
Wow.
that's typically what it
Yeah.
has to take in some instances. I didn't really have a major beef with the situation at the time because it was what it was at the time.
Mhm.
But it has certainly changed a ton. And kudos to Mr. Norm Carlson on a life well lived. Speaking of the Florida situation, what about Kamani McLean, the former five-star corner from the state of Florida, shortstop with Coach Prime in
Yeah.
Colorado out there in
Right.
Boulder? There was some back and forth upon Cormani's departure from the Buffaloes, but it appears that he will return home and suit up for those Florida Gators. Now, with Cormani, it can be a little bit volatile. So,
Yeah.
first and
Yeah.
foremost, what you would like to see from Cormani McLean, whether it's as a walk on, which I understand perhaps that's the case, Brent, um, that he can get through a stretch where he's able to show consistency and some development, not just in terms of his football skills or acumen, but just day to day participation in a structured environment like he's going to have
Yes.
to adapt to
Yes.
at the University of Florida. Now, if he does that, the payoff can be big because this is an extremely talented individual. Uh, I hope for his sake, first and foremost, that it does work out. Florida's going to find players, but this is interesting to say the least because it didn't look like, for all of his talent, it didn't look like there was much of a market for Cormani McLean before this most recent news.
Yeah, this really may make or break him being at Florida. You've got a coach and Billy Napier who is got enough, I think, humility and transparency in him that maybe he can really help McLean mature, because that's been the problem. He's been immature. He's missed classes. He's missed practices. That will no longer be allowed at the University of Florida. And look, we don't have time to go into all of them, but I do give Billy Napier some credit for the talent that he's bringing in, Trav. There are a lot of number ones by these recruits. And what I mean by that is you've got the number one quarterback and DJ Lagway. You've got one of the top also defensive players in LJ McCray. And they are supposed to sometime over the weekend, it looks like Elijah Badger, who's at Arizona State, is supposed to commit to them too. So look, they've still got a lot to do as far as being an efficient staff and being organized during game day. But your reality here is Billy Napier is bringing in some pretty impressive talent.
Yes, it appears that is the case. And speaking of a team bringing in some impressive defensive talent, the Alabama Crimson Tide here in the last week looks to have done the same. Brent, Deshaun Jones from the aforementioned Wake Forest football program going to join the Crimson Tide at that corner spot. And then King Mack via Penn State, a versatile DB, more of a safety, sub-package defensive back. Alabama really looking to bolster the back end of that defense since, January via the portal with not only some experience, but maybe guys, as you go from Nick Saban's style of play to Kane Womack's style of play, in terms of fit, might offer a little bit of an upgrade there too.
And you really have dealt with this in your podcast, and Keon Sabb, Cameron Howard, and you mentioned King Mack. Now, these may not be household names for people yet, but they needed some depth. They've certainly got the talent, and he did what he said he would do, Kalen DeBoer did, and restock in this defense. Now, then the good thing for them is when we talked about back-to-backs a few minutes ago, they've got some early games that's going to give these guys chances to get on the field and kind of mesh together a little bit. But this defense looks a whole lot better, Trav, than it did a few months ago.
Well, it does, especially when you talk about an area of that defense that lost a ton, the corners, some of the safety help. You look at the transfer portal run for Kalen DeBoer, and you include Damani Jackson in that, who was a part of the previous regime's moves in the portal. You've got 5 experienced defensive backs now. You literally, in a 4-2-5 defense, can match up these transfer portal additions with those spots in the secondary. A couple safeties, a sub-package DB, a couple corners. Now, Malachi Moore, obviously, going to be a cog in that secondary. So all these guys aren't just going to step right onto the field, but certainly the potential to be top 3 guys at their respective areas at a minimum. And more than a couple of these guys probably going to see the field early and often for Kane Womack in 2024. What about Texas A&M and head coach Mike Elko out on the booster circuit? He seems to be a nice fit there. What are you getting from this lead up to his first season there in College Station?
I think what he's talked about, that they've got a athlete, Terry Busey. He's only 17. He's from Texas, but everybody wanted this kid. He's going to probably play multiple positions. Elko's pretty smart. He told some of these booster clubs, you guys got to be patient with him and not put pressure on him and give him a chance to do what he needs to do. Now, the thing that really got my attention was what he told the club in Dallas. He said, we're going to line up 4 NFL defensive linemen when we start a game. Nick Scorton, who everybody loves, Shamir Stewart, Shamir Turner, DJ Hicks. And again, a lot of our listeners may not be familiar with those names, but Trav, that's one of those things to where even though you lost Nolan to Ole Miss, that really got my attention. A lot of people look at how good they could be offensively, particularly if Connor Weigman is able to come back and play well. But this front 7 from A&M could be standouts before the year's over.
And Mike Elko is a defensive guy.
He is.
And he gives me George O'Leary vibes from way back. Remember George O'Leary?
Oh, yes.
Did a great job at Georgia Tech. It looked like he was headed to Notre Dame. Then you had the resume snafu. Kind of the same with Mike Elko. He's going from the ACC in a program at Duke to the marquee level, you could certainly say, with Texas A&M. So yeah, I would expect A&M's defense to be wrecking crew like, perhaps even as you get into this Elko era there at A&M. As we wrap things up in your notebook, Brent, you said earlier you saw or you were on hand for club visits from Billy Napier and Mike Norvell on the Florida and Florida State fronts. What about Napier? How is he received these days? What's the vibe? That's what I'm as interested in as much as anything he had to say is, does it feel like he still has this fan base when you go to things like club meetings and he's there? And what's the sort of reaction to him a couple years in now?
Yeah, there was a good crowd, and they were. I don't know how optimistic they were. I think they were certainly supportive. I think they understand that Napier's having overcome Dan Mullen's just either lack thereof or just refusal to recruit, but still they want to see some things cleaned up, like you and I've talked about, these on the field, in game issues that have got to be dealt with a lot better. They think the coaching staff is better. And I give Napier credit. I don't use this word very often with football coaches, but I mean, I can't help but be impressed with his humility and transparency. I think he's a guy that's comfortable in his own skin. And he said, we really finally feel good about this roster. And I think that's important to be able to think about that. So at this point, he's okay. But Trav, August 31st, about 8 o'clock, after that Miami game, might that determine a lot of how these fans feel?
That one is going to be warm potentially in a lot of ways. You're
Yes.
going to have that 3:30 Eastern kickoff, and then depending on how it goes, could be hot for either of the coaches in that
Yes.
game. Perhaps even
Yes.
Mario Cristobal might be feeling it a little bit after that one. Well, Brent, as always, great stuff with the notebook. Always great stuff with you here on Second Helping, the show of choice for fans and followers of the number one league in all of collegiate athletics, the Southeastern Conference. Anything else, Brent, before we get out of here?
Yeah. Before two questions for you. I am intrigued because I enjoy things like this. Trev, that iconic theme for the SEC on CBS is now going to the Big Ten. So it's obvious that, Trav, with all that SEC money, are you telling me that they didn't get a copyright on that music so they could carry it with them? But no,
the network retains all of those rights. They get the music with what they paid for all those years. No. It's like a divorce, right? There's some things like the couch you don't really care about, but then there's some other things, you're not getting the 85-inch HD.
That's right.
That's going with me, or the dog, or something like that.
Absolutely.
A pet. It is what it is. Maybe if you're an SEC fan, you just turn on the intro to the Big Ten game to hear the music, and close your eyes, and then switch it over to the SEC game on ABC or ESPN. You'll just have to kind of maybe work it like that in your head, or just have it on your YouTube fired up.
And Trev, we've got to know Pop's behavior last weekend at Mother's Day, and also at the ceremony at Florida.
Oh yeah.
What was it, Trev? Was it exemplary, shall we say?
Yeah, he's really, really toned it down. You're still not ever totally sure with him. He went to the honor ceremony for the niece, Bailey, pharmacy college graduate now, pharmacist, doctor, Bailey. And so, yeah, he enjoyed that. We went down Saturday to Exact Tech Arena for the actual graduation. It was tremendous. He held in there. He did well. Mother's Day held up well,
Good.
did better in terms of gifting for Nana.
Good.
It wasn't a bag of Skittles this year, so that's always an upgrade for Pops. And
Yes.
yeah, Pops is doing okay, I guess.
Well, and Trev, I'll end on this. A huge congratulations to Savannah Reier and her promotion. Really proud of her. So much of that is because of really good parenting, I would throw in there.
Hey.
But what an honor, and she has really earned it, hasn't she?
Yeah, we're proud of all of them, as you are of your girls, and you know how it is. You kind of hang on everything they do,
Yeah.
and just hope
Yeah.
and pray for the best for them. More than anything, you just want them happy. If they're
Yes.
happy what they're doing and they're happy in their everyday life, that's all you want for them. And so, yeah, she's doing well, and we'll see what the future holds for her out there at SC and get
Yes.
LSU, as we talked about, coming up here
That's
pretty
right.
soon. A lot of fun, Brent. Always appreciate
Always.
it. Always enjoy it with you right here on Second Helping. If you haven't subscribed to our channel here, please do that right now. Hit a like button for us if you don't mind. Turn on those notifications. You'll get all of our content, all of our shows here on Reier on YouTube as they drop. For Brent, Travis, thanks again. Until next time, so long, everybody.